将居鸠，在河之洲。窈窕淑女，君子好逑。参差荇菜，左右流之。窈窕淑女，寤寐求之。Hola, bienvenido. Welcome back to my private Chinese literature lesson. Sorry, it is a bit long from last class to this class, but because I'm going to tell you something really exciting, so it takes a bit long for me to prepare this lesson, so I have to study a little myself too. But I'm going to tell you, what I'm going to tell you is about this book here. Here. It's called 诗经. So you can translate it as the poem Bible or the Bible of poems. So yes, today I'm going to tell you something about this collection of poems. That was when the human race was very young, and the poems was their primary way to express themselves. So poems was the earliest form of literature, and this is the first collection of poems in China, so was very important in Chinese history. Yeah. But because there's a lot of information to tell, so I'm going to cut this topic into two parts. The first part, I'm going to tell you some background information and some knowledge about this book, and the second part, I'm going to give you some examples so we can translate some of the poems together. Okay, let's start. Okay, so the title of the book is, yes, in Chinese it's 诗经, but it can be translated as 300 poems, because of course there are 305 poems in this book. Another translation of the title is the Book of Songs, because those poems was originally songs with music, but I guess because back then people don't know how to write down music, and the music was lost along the way, so only the lyrics survives, and the lyrics become poems we can appreciate today. Yes. And time, when was the book was wrote? And the book was not composed overnight, it was constructed over like 500 years, so it was over like a long period of time. That was from about 11th century BC to 6th century BC, so that's about like 3,100 years ago to about 2,600 years ago. Very long time ago. Yes. And back then China was in this dynasty called Zhou dynasty. Zhou dynasty was one of the dynasty very early on. Yeah, Zhou dynasty. Zhou dynasty was a slave society. So you have slave owners and slaves. You have a central court as an emperor in the middle, and then there are like regional lands or kingdoms. You have lords in charge of their own lands. So sort of like Europe later on. So yeah, it's that kind of society. Why it was important? Because China was a big country. It was not as big as now, but it's still very big. So because it's pretty big and people speak differently and the culture varies a lot, and this book have poems collected all over the country, so in very different regions in China. So even though people speak differently, and when the poems was written down in a book, it was like standardized, so it kind of unifies the culture. So even though you speak differently, but you have like the same unified written text, so it helps the people recognize they are the same country. Of course, it was not happened overnight. Back then, like people think they are like from different countries. I don't know. No, yeah, but they recognize their regions more. But then later on, you know, like when you have the same book to appreciate, so you recognize the same culture. And who wrote the book? Only a few songs have a specific author. Most of the songs or the poems was like unnamed. Don't have a a specific author. That was because the poems was collected all over the country by scholars, intellectuals, or officials from the court. So they go to different places and they collect the poems at the time, and then you can say people of the time wrote the book. So there's no like specific author, but Confucius, he had a lot of things to do with this book. Some people say that he deleted some of the songs or poems from this book because they didn't fit his doctrine, but there was no hard evidence saying he deleted the book, some of the content from the book, but he did editate some of the songs, and then he make it more like fit his doctrine, and he taught this book, and he encouraged students to study this book. So from the students and scholars in China who wants to get a job in the imperial court have to study this book so they can pass the exam and become a court official. So from very early on, this book kind of become one of the must learn in Confucius doctrine, or if you want to become a scholar. Yeah. Classification. There are 3 types of poems in this book. They say the classification was due because of the music, which was lost, so we cannot hear the music. But I guess there are difference in the style of the poems. So the first type is called feng. Feng means wind, but here it means folk songs. So they are more like songs collected in the regional places in China, in different places, and it's more about people's everyday life. So those are this type of songs are the songs that's most popular today. So it passed on. It's more easy to understand for today's people. So that's the first type. And the second type is called ya. Ya means elegant now, but here I guess it means orthodox, or anyway, it's the kind of songs from the central court. So it's more from the central court. And the last type is called song. So all this, so those are the songs written by for religious purpose. Back then we don't have Buddhism or Taoism yet, but people went to a temple to worship their ancestors. So that is the kind of songs they sing when they worship their ancestors. They say, okay, how great my ancestors did, and you fight a war, and then you build this country, and you're great, and those kind of things. So 3 types. Yeah. Okay, I guess that is the basic information about Shi Jing. So very basic. Okay, so here ends our first part, and the next part I'm going to tell you more about the poems itself. Okay, bye.